Space, an endless ocean of stars and planets. It's often forgotten about in a world where working cars are scarcer than portable nuke launchers. That being said, we still have had some experiences with space in Fallout. We went into space with the Mothership Zeta DLC, and the Enclave has used multiple satellites over the years. And they're really the only faction in the post-war world that could have any presence in space. So what if there's actually a branch of the Enclave in space? Potentially, they could be on a satellite. In Fallout 3, there's a scientist that states there's records of dozens of military satellites from before the war, and they suggest there could even be hundreds. But the only Enclave satellites we know of are automated. We do know of other satellites that were manned, like the Valiant 1 and in Van Buren, the bomb stations. However, it's clear these satellites weren't designed to operate for hundreds of years, judging by the condition of them. So the Enclave being stationed on a man-made satellite seems unlikely. What I think could be a possibility, and what I want to explore in this video, is the biggest satellite in Earth's orbit, the Moon. This idea is hardly new, but I still wanted to look at it nonetheless. What if the Enclave, or US military remnant, had a base on the Moon? It would definitely be more likely than a satellite. Moon colonization has been an idea for, well, as long as going to the moon was an idea. Especially in the Fallout universe with the idealistic consumer society of the mid-20th century still present. The moon would also be able to be terraformed. In the on and off canon of the Fallout Bible, it says, quote, "In practice, a GECK contains a fertilizer system with a variety of food seeds, soil supplements, and chemicals that can fertilize arid wasteland, and possibly selected sections of the moon's surface preconditioned to accept the GECK." Based on this evidence, we can at least gather that after 200 years, an operational base on the moon is more plausible than an operational manned satellite. So we know which one is more viable, the moon. But is there actually any evidence that there could be a base on the moon? Well, the evidence I want to cite is the mural in the Museum of Freedom. This mural is a depiction of America's history. The inscription of this mural reads, "This mural commemorates the many sacrifices of the brave men and women of the United States Armed Forces, from Lexington and Concord to the shores of Iwo Jima, from the Sea of Tranquility to the Anchorage front line. Americans have fought and died through the ages to secure our nation's freedom. May their sacrifices remind us all that freedom is a privilege afforded to the many, yet hard won by a noble few." We can see this in the mural. From left to right, it shows the Revolutionary War, World War II, something on the moon, and Anchorage. It's possible there could have been some artistic liberties taken with this painting, but I'm going to assume that everything is as accurate as possible, with the exception of the transitions between time period. Now, I want to take a minute or two to go off topic and say this little portion here definitely seems like a depiction of the Korean War. Further left, we can see a small area devoted to World War I, so it's not impossible that there's a section devoted to a smaller war after World War II. The vehicles are also a clear giveaway. The tank at the front looks like an M46 Patton, and the helicopter looks like a H-19, both of which were used through the entirety of the Korean War. As far as I can tell, this is the only evidence of the Korean War occurring in the Fallout universe, so I thought that was cool. But on with the main topic. Here is the area where what appears to be the moon is shown. At first, this may seem like the first moon landing. It shows a lander looking like the Virgo 2, and it's the Sea of Tranquility where the moon landing occurred. However, I don't believe this is the first moon landing. The placement of a mere moon landing in this mural doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The rest of the events depicted in this mural are wars that the US has fought in. And while the people on the Valiant 11 mission were all servicemen, the USSA would be a civilian administration and the moon landing would be a civilian affair. There's also the quote of Americans fighting and dying for freedom. That doesn't really work for the exploration mission that the moon landing was. Now, I want to look at the mural specifically to explain my point further. The thing that immediately catches the eye is the astronaut. What's strange about them is the gun in their hand. It appears to be an energy weapon, but those weren't developed by the 1960s. The astronaut holding a weapon would indicate there is potentially a threat of conflict on the moon. There's also the suit. In Fallout, we have examples of spacesuits in-game, 2 to be precise. One used in the 1960s and one used up until the Great War. Both of these suits are based off Project Mercury and Gemini suits. The design for these suits has barely changed over more than a century. So why does the one in this mural look so different? Well, if you look closely, apart from the suit clearly being based off Buzz Lightyear, it's sectioned. There's clear gaps between the main material where the joints are. I'm just going to go ahead and say it looks like armor. So the same thing with the gun. Why would astronauts be wearing this if there wasn't something that would shoot at them? Now, I think you're getting as tired of this mural as I am, so I'm going to speed through this section. There's also a rocket in the background, which if this were a single mission to the moon and back, there wouldn't be a rocket like that taking off from the moon. Next, easily the biggest giveaway, and maybe what I should have started with, there's Stingray Deluxes in space behind the astronaut. If you didn't know, the Stingray was a fighter jet used by the Air Force up until the Great War. Lastly, and not actually in the mural, there's the Delta IX rocket. A rocket designed for space travel, but later converted by the US military to be a nuclear warhead. The only reason to convert a rocket capable of reaching the moon to a nuclear warhead is if you wanted to target the moon with a nuclear warhead. So what have we learned now? It seems that the American military had some involvement in a conflict on the moon. And what happens when the US military engages in conflicts in foreign territory? They set up bases. From the evidence I've gone through, the US is very advanced in space travel. If those Stingrays were actually in space, I doubt they would be able to travel there from Earth. They most likely would have launched from a base on the moon. That only leaves the end of the conflict. Because once it had ended, it would just be the question of whether the forces on the moon would all return to Earth, or would some stay behind to establish a permanent base. Given how many orbital strike platforms the US had, and the rising tensions between them and China, it wouldn't be crazy to think that they could have constructed a nuclear launch facility on the moon. I'm not sure if this base would be an enclave or a regular US military site. There's also the option of it being something like the oil rig for the Enclave. Possibly the moon could have some sort of rare resource. Even though I've already discussed how Bethesda directed the Enclave in a different direction to what Black Isle originally intended, that doesn't mean that Bethesda couldn't incorporate the Enclave colonizing outer space a little bit. The moon is still technically part of Earth. This might also explain where Enclave High Command is during the events of Broken Steel. Even though I love the Mount Weather theory, the moon theory is pretty cool too. But how would this actually affect us? Well, I think the only reason for us to go to this base would be if there's something wrong at the base. For example, if the nuclear missiles for some reason are going to fire, or maybe the base has gone silent. Of course, to worry about this, we would most likely have to be a member of the Enclave, which is still possible in Fallout 76's future if we're lucky. This definitely would work better in a properly single-player game, but Fallout 76 is still an option. If the Enclave were to give you this mission to the moon, getting there would still be a problem. We know that Big Mountain had teleportation, most likely pre-war. That was still relatively small compared to moon teleportation. It's still entirely possible that the Enclave could have this tech, especially if it's further down the timeline. What I think would be extremely cool, however, is if the first time you go to the moon base, you have to use a rocket because the teleportation is offline. This might also explain why they need you specifically for the job. The only problem is, pulling off a rocket launch in a Fallout game would be pretty hard. So maybe it is better that this is done in the next Fallout game. And if the next game was to be set after Fallout 3, it would also mean that, potentially, the story on the moon could be about wiping out the Zetans and finally destroying Mothership Zeta. For now, though, all we can do is wait and see. And remember to like, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. I'll catch you later.